Hello there, friends. Welcome to BJJ Meditations. This is BJJ Meditations, episode number 59. I'm your host, Joe Hannon, coming to you from a very soggy New Jersey. I'm going to get another 2 inches of rain over the next 2 days. Actually, I think it's like 2 inches a day over the next 2 days. So, hoping my basement doesn't flood. Such is the life of being a human in the age of climate change. What can I say? A lot of nerves over here this week. We've got the New York Open coming up on Saturday. That will be my most recent competition since the Miami Open, where things did not go so well. Well, I got some points at least. Historically, the New York Open has been a tough one for me. The lower belts, those divisions tend to be stacked. And of course, we get a lot of competitive schools in the New York area. So we'll see how the black belt division is. The more I learn about competing, the more I realize I'm at a disadvantage, because the people who tend to be still competing at black belt are the really serious competitors, and they've got a lot of experience under their belt. And I would say I have like a slightly above average amount of competition experience. But the thing that hurt me was that I had a long layoff resulting from the pandemic and also from being a new dad, where I didn't compete much as like a late stage purple belt, and certainly at all as a brown belt. I think I had one competition as a brown belt before I got my black belt. So I have no idea what's going to happen. I'm also sick right now. I just have some upper respiratory crud going on, and I can't be on the mats because I don't want to get anyone else who's competing sick for Saturday. Usually at this point in a fight camp, I'm not doing anything that is going to translate into a new skill being deployed on the mats during comp. And realistically, my strength or conditioning is not going to deteriorate at all from a few days off the mats. And I've certainly been pushing the pace and intensity over the past, I don't know, it feels like I've been in a training camp since December, getting ready for the Miami Open. Yeah, realistically, I'm not going to lose anything, but this week has always been important for me psychologically. Just staying active and building confidence, and not having a couple of days to do that are certainly feeling painful. I coached at a local comp on Saturday, and I was going to compete there, but ultimately there was no one in my weight division, and the fight that was offered to me was with somebody who was 220 pounds or more, so I elected not to do that and instead focus on the New York Open. So I didn't train on Saturday. Sunday is usually a day that I devote to the family. Monday I was planning to train in the afternoon, but was sick. And here it is Tuesday, usually a hard night of training for me, but I'm also feeling sick and not going to train. So next episode, I suspect, will be a recap of the New York Open, what I learned, the quality of the experiences. But heading into it, I'm really thinking about trying to go into it with a sense of radical self-acceptance, to extend to myself, excuse me, the compassion and empathy that I so readily extend to other people, but struggle to give to myself. And what that looks like in this situation is really being divorced from outcome of the competition, to just go in accepting who I am and my ability to perform, and kind of seeing what happens. So we'll see how successful I am at that, and I will report back to you in the interest of complete transparency, which I try to bring to this podcast. And speaking of radical self-acceptance and presence and mindfulness and knowledge of one's inner workings, it all dovetails nicely into the guest on this week's episode, who is Josh Liu. You might remember Josh from the collab episode we did a little while back. Josh is based in San Diego, California, one of my favorite places in the country. He's a white belt, and he's been training for just under 2 years. He's the co-host of the 1-800-BJJ Help podcast with Jake Luigi from Less Impressed, More Involved BJJ on YouTube. Highly, highly recommend and endorse that content. Today we go deep on meditation, mindfulness, and the applications, or lack of applications in some instances, for the practice of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. Josh also offers up a brief meditation at the end of the episode, so stay tuned for that. Obviously, if you're driving or otherwise operating heavy machinery, you might want to keep your eyes open and instead just focus as much as you possibly can while that meditation is going on. But I hope you find this interesting. I hope it piques your curiosity. I hope it potentially introduces you to the benefits of a mindfulness practice. Josh has been practicing for 12 years as a meditator. He spent a total of 45 days spread out over the years on silent meditation retreat. And he's currently pursuing a certification that will give him the green light to teach mindfulness meditation in some official capacity. Josh is an awesome dude, as is Jake. Really enjoyed talking to Josh on this episode, and I'm really looking forward to having him back sometime in the future with Jake to talk about bow hunting and the potential thematic overlaps with Jiu Jitsu. So anyway, without further ado, here is Josh Liu. You were getting ready for a competition recently, weren't you? Or
Yes.
Did that happen? Or are you still preparing?
I just competed on Saturday.
How'd it go?
And wow, I learned a lot about myself. Oh my gosh. It was my second ever competition, and I won my first match. I competed in 2 weight classes. I won my first match, lost the next 3. The last 2 were kind of close, but each one I just got more and more exhausted. And
That's a lot of fighting. That's a lot.
yeah, 10 minutes apart about too. So I was like, yeah. So it's very bittersweet, because on one hand, I'm like proud of myself for putting myself out there and all that. And on another hand, I'm just like, I can feel almost like a shame around like the weak spots in my mind, or when I gave up and things like that. Or I remember going into the 3rd and 4th match, I was so exhausted that I could sense I didn't even believe in myself anymore. And it was just like, I don't like that feeling. Yeah. So I came back from competition and immediately signed up for another one. I got another one in like 2 weeks. So like, yeah.
So this is actually an interesting segue into like, well, I think it's interesting. We'll see if the audience thinks it's interesting. We'll say it's a segue into what I wanted to talk to you about today. You said that you felt shame around your performance, and I've been there. I think back to my performance at Masters Worlds, and I feel shame about it too, because there was a moment where like the fight went out of me, which sounds like similar to what you're describing. Mm-hmm. But you're present to that shame. You're aware of it, and you've sort of externalized it, and that requires, in my mind, it requires like a degree of mindfulness. And I'm wondering how you relate to what I just described. Like, it seems like you can externalize that shame and look at it and feel it, and then just, watch it pass, and then, I'm going to sign up for another competition. And I might feel shame again. I might feel something completely different, but it sounds like you are distant from the stimulus and watching it unfold.
I try to be. I think the meditation, the mindfulness practice does help with this, along with journaling. I think there's we have a lot of thoughts, and then emotions come with those thoughts at times, and it's helpful, I think, to disentangle a little bit and hear where the stories are coming from, and just try to see it more clearly, maybe more objectively, and not be so identified with it. Yeah. Like, instead of like, people can say I am angry versus I feel anger. Like, that's an experience that I'm having versus being fully identified and captured by it.
So let's talk more about the feeling side of things, because I think that's the harder aspect. We live in a world in which cognition is sort of the standard operating system. That's how we put food on the table. That's how the human brain is a prediction engine, and that's how we survive. That's how we thrive, right? And in my mind, that kind of there it is. In my mind, that downplays the feeling. It kind of gets like shunted away, and I'm curious how, if at all, like mindfulness has helped you tune into the feeling side of human experience, and how that might translate to Jiu Jitsu.
Yeah, I'll try to answer the first part. How it might translate to Jiu Jitsu will be really interesting too. But yeah, my story with this, I really resonate with what you're saying about kind of living in our heads. I think I used to be very like a toxic positivity type of guy. Like, I was listening to Tony Robbins, going to his conferences, and just if I experienced something challenging or emotions that are unpleasant, my first thing would be to use my mind to try to put a positive spin on this. This is an opportunity. The whole Jocko, like, good thing, right? Good. Now there's an opportunity for XYZ. And sure, those things may be true, but I think what I left on the table was I wasn't giving myself permission to feel things that were unpleasant or uncomfortable and just try to immediately like push it away and go towards something else. And I think over the last few years, I started therapy, doing a lot of deep work in some of the healing. And part of that journey for me has been when confronted with emotional challenges or discomfort or unpleasant feelings, this phrase of I stole from Tara Brach, and she says, this too, like this too belongs. And to first, before trying to change everything and turn it into the next opportunity or motivation or drive or whatever, the first step to be like, okay, what is this? And then sit with it and just allow it to be. And I think that allowing to be place to just sit with it before using the mind then to try to problem solve or whatever, I don't know, it almost gives you some spaciousness and tolerance of the discomfort, and then come from a place of calm and objectivity versus maybe like a reactive, desperate pushing or pulling away from whatever you're feeling. I don't know if that makes sense, but
it does.
Yeah.
It's what's coming up for me as you're describing that reactive energy is when you're rolling with somebody and they're coming at you with a lot of intensity and you start coming back with a lot of intensity, and it just becomes this whirlwind of turbulent energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to, and I think some of this is bullshit, but like Jiu Jitsu, you know, the gentle art. Rather another approach to approaching that energy would be to receive it and step aside from it, and then that ends up being, since this is a combative art, that ends up sort of being the undoing of the other person. But really it starts with receiving and understanding and appreciating, and there's some curiosity too that needs to happen there. And that door just doesn't open if you're like, get this shit away from me, like I don't want to deal with this, you know, Jedi mind trick, I'm going to spin it into something positive.
Right. And yeah, I think jiu-jitsu related, there's some qualities of this mindfulness that I think can play in those moments, and then there's some I think longer term. Like the long term, I think sticking with a martial art requires a lot of patience and a lot of discipline. And I feel like it reminds me of a quote from Thomas Sterner. He wrote a really great book called The Practicing Mind, and he said the problem with patience and discipline is that developing each of them requires both of them. And I love that quote. And I think part of patience and discipline is, maybe patience is more like this ability to sit with delay, or this tolerance of like things not happening the way you think they should be happening, or the progress you should be making, these self-imposed timelines of how quickly we should progress. And then discipline being like, I think it reminds me of this Andrew Huberman's go, no go part of our brain of there's a part that tells us to take action and go, and there's another part that tells us, oh, hang back, like I know you want to do this, but don't do it. There's that discipline. I think the practice of meditation, of training our mind to direct our attention in a very deliberate way, helps us with both that patience and discipline. So that those qualities I think can extend to jiu-jitsu, of like staying committed to that path. And then in the micro moments, I think the most clear example for me when I first got into jiu-jitsu, where I noticed the benefits, was like when I'm about to be finished in a triangle, but I managed to sneak in my other hand. So I'm like still safe, but it's very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I find myself having just a little bit extra tolerance of like, oh, I can be with this. I can just hang on here at the last like step of not dying and just hold on for a little bit. It actually happened in my third match this last competition. I had a triangle. I just had snuck my other hand in. It was like safe for a bit. Finally escaped. I was mounted triangle. It was so uncomfortable. Oh. My neck was so sore the next day, and yeah.
I had a very similar experience. I'm getting ready for the New York Open next weekend, and I was training with one of our blue belts who, like, I'm old enough to be his father, and he's very strong. And I had already had like 4 or 5 very hard rounds before I got to him. generally what I do is I start with like the toughest person in the room and then work backwards. So I got to him knowing like it's just going to be all young male intense energy, and I was up on points in the round, and like he put that triangle on me, and there I was doing exactly what you were doing, and I'm like, this is fucking terrible, and this is gonna hurt so bad tomorrow, but I really want to prove to myself that I can sit with this. And like it really wasn't a matter of resisting the triangle, because like you, I just had that frame in place and I was just hanging out there. Like I was not actively resisting, but it was really an exercise of, there's going to come a point in this competition where something is really shitty, and I have to be present to it. I just have to absorb it, and I have to sit with it. And that was like my literal way of practicing that. Like I knew that triangle was coming. I saw it from a mile away. Was so tired, there was nothing I could do with it, and it's just like that deep breath before the plunge, you know, like right, yeah. Okay, like, let's see how long I can ride this out, you know. And I think it's important to have those moments on the mats from time to time.
It reminds me of Sam Harris talking about this idea of unbearable pain, and he describes how like for those who haven't heard, that there technically is no such thing as unbearable pain. And he said, imagine if someone drove a nail through your knee, and you would imagine like that would be super painful. And what he mentioned was that for every moment you're feeling it, you're bearing that pain.
Yes.
It's the fear of having to bear it for the next moment, or, oh no, am I going to walk again? Or all the other thoughts of the future that haven't happened yet. And it just multiplies the pain into all this suffering, emotional, mental suffering, and turmoil. So
it's something that comes up a lot in my coaching work when people are averse or afraid of something. And when we really interrogate what it is they're afraid of, they're afraid of the fear. They're afraid of how fear is making them feel. It's really like not the thing at all, because let's say the thing is competing. You're going to compete. Most likely you're going to be okay. You're going to get on the other side of that event, and you're going to realize like, oh, there's nothing there. Like all of that was a mirage, and it just vanished like mist, you know? What you were afraid of was the feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way you get that realization is by doing it. So it's this weird like double bind paradox, right? And, but like, man, once you realize that, it's a real huge unlock, you know?
Right. Reminds me of a little story I heard on a meditation retreat from one of the teachers, and he said something like, there was a guy who went into a cave, and he has this little fire, and he's looking around the cave walls, and he sees a painting of a tiger, and he's like, oh my God, it's a tiger, and he runs outside, he's super scared. And he said, how many times do we do this in our minds? We think about the future, we paint our own tigers, and then we react to those tigers that we paint in our mind. And it's just funny how we can trip about the future like that.
We can trip about the future like that, and then this is where I think, so in like my operating system, this is why I think having an embodied practice like Jiu Jitsu is so essential, because it forces you to grapple with the literal tiger, you know? So it teaches your body and your mind, like, this is the real danger. Like everybody says, you know, I come off the mats and I feel so much lighter and all my troubles have vanished and I feel so much more present. And it's like, well, yeah, because you actually did a thing that was dangerous. You know, your nervous system and your body experienced something substantial. It wasn't that tiger on the cave wall. It was actually the fucking tiger. And you faced the tiger and you survived. Mm-hmm. And I think you need that embodied practice to go along with the mental, spiritual practice. Like you really can't have one without the other.
Yeah, I think so. I love how you describe it on your podcast as that pressure cooker environment. And wow, just coming off the competition this weekend, I feel like myself is part of the tiger too. My own mind, the weaknesses, the doubts, the excuses, the fears coming out. So not only wrestling like the literal tiger in front of you, but observing the ones in yourself have been super interesting.
Yeah. And that's the whole other side of it is, I think of it as like shadow grappling. Like you're literally grappling with your own shadow. Mm-hmm. Like most of the time when I've lost, it's because that it's like Shadow Joe lost the match. Like that fucking dastard just messed everything up, you know, because like I didn't have him under control. It wasn't the guy across the room for me. It was me.
Yeah.
You know? It was
Yeah.
the darker version of me. And some people are willing to, and again, this is in my mind. Well, I'm curious to see what you think about it. In my mind, it's boils down to mindfulness and presence. Like, are you willing to not just sit with external stimuli that are uncomfortable or challenging, but are you willing to sit in your own literal psychological shit and accept it, you know, and like maybe even learn to love it. Like that's kind of what I'm working on right now. Talk to me in another 50 years and see if I got that down. But yeah, I think that's why a lot of people bounce off competition too, is because it really reveals your own shit to you in a way that just rolling in the gym might not.
Yeah, it does. I've been, oh man, my journal entries have just been all about that this week from coming off that competition. So yeah, that definitely resonates a lot with me. I'm curious, how do you use meditation or mindfulness with your clients, if at all?
So I'm very gentle, and I want to get into how you came to a mindfulness practice and also like how you came to Jiu Jitsu and if there's any synergy there. So bookmark that. But I'm very gentle with it because I'm very sensitive to the religiosity of it. I think you can have mindfulness without spirituality. I have strong opinions about why people do need spiritual practice and why I've kind of like cultivated my own sense of spirituality. But those two things are so intertwined that I'm very, very gentle about it. And I will meet people basically wherever they're at. Like if somebody has something they're already doing, like I recommend the Elite HRV app to a lot of clients. And that has like a little mindfulness practice built into the HRV breathing that they can elect to do or not. Like if they're doing that, great. To me, it's all about like, what's the thing that has the least friction that's going to be able to like get them to do it. I'm just looking, it's like a low bar. Like, hey, like several of my clients, I have them after they train right now. They're just seated silent meditation for 5 to 10 minutes. Like make it as frictionless as possible. I don't care if it's like you're done and you step to the side of the mat and do it. I don't care if you have to go home and do it, but it's really about like what works for you and what's the thing that you're going to do most consistently.
Mm-hmm. I 100% agree with that approach, and I found that to be the most effective in my experience. I went on a recent retreat in the winter, and one of the teachers, I think close to the end maybe, was talking about, you know, your daily practice and taking this beyond retreat. And he was like, after all these years, the number one thing I've learned is just lower the bar.
Yep.
He was like, especially he had recently had a kid, and just, he was like, if you can just squeeze in like a moment of mindfulness a day, that is beautiful and amazing progress. And to not have to set the bar so high of like, oh, I have to hit 10 minutes a day to check off that box that I meditated. And just lower the bar down, you know, a moment is beautiful. And I really like that approach.
I strive for 10 minutes a day, and like I've been really good lately about hitting it, but there, like today, I don't know if I'm going to, well, actually we might do a meditation at the end of the podcast here. So I'll get my minutes in, hopefully. But I have this big water pitcher in my kitchen, it's a Berkey water filter. And I have like a ceramic pitcher that I fill it with. And like on days, I have to fill that pitcher or that filter at least once a day. And on days when everything is just going fucking crazy, it takes me 6 fills of the ceramic pitcher to fill the Berkey. I try to as mindfully fill that pitcher from the faucet and pour out the water. Like just tune into that. It's like my little tea ceremony, my little Zen tea ceremony, you know, like really tune into the nuances of the water filling the pitcher from the faucet and then transferring the water, the sound it makes, how it looks, how the bubbles of gas kind of rise through the pitcher as the water is filling it up. Like, it sounds crazy to talk about this stuff, but like some days that's what I got. You know, like I got a 2-year-old son, multiple business ventures, a wife, a house. Like some days my meditation is pouring water, you know, and that's better than nothing.
That is Beautiful. And actually, what's really cool about that is sometimes we view meditation as this formal sitting practice on a cushion, in silence. But I think what's really beautiful about the pouring water is that now quality of mindfulness is coming off the cushion and into your daily life. And I think that's when it's, I think there's a book called Altered Traits, but that's when it's, instead of focusing on like altering your state of mind of like, oh, I want this calm or whatever, but really the long-term goal is to alter these traits,
Yeah.
this trait of mindfulness that you can carry on as you're pouring water, or when you're with your kid, or stuck in traffic, or waiting in line at the grocery store, whatever that might be. So
And I think that's
I love that example.
the point you make about not wanting to cultivate like a state of mind or a quality of mind is hugely important. Like one of my favorite collections of poetry is this book by Frank O'Hara called Meditations in an Emergency. And I used to have a copy of it on my desk when I was the news editor at the Star Ledger, just as a reminder of like, shit is going to go crazy. It's a given. Like, given what you're doing for a living right now, how can you have presence in those moments of emergency? And really, that's what it's all about in my mind. I'm curious like how you relate to this, but it's not about like, I've never used the app, but there's that app called Calm. Just the name alone like kind of bothers me, right? Like, because okay, great, like it's wonderful to feel calm. I would certainly rather feel calm than anxious, but in my mind, it's about being present to whatever the state of the water is at the current moment. It's not about trying to change the temperature of the water.
100%. Yeah, I used to have a lot of resistance towards the meditation apps because a lot of the titles for like it's like meditation for sleep, for calm, or for sports performance, and I didn't even try those guided meditations. Turns out a lot of them are great, but just the entry into it of like, it's almost like the pitch or like the bait and switch is like, it seemed like it was framing it for this desire for a certain state, but yeah, just exactly like you said, not changing the temperature of the water. I use the analogy of the weather of like,
Yeah,
we look up the sky and sure, maybe we want our minds to be clear, and sometimes the sky's clear, but no, sometimes it's cloudy, and it's okay. It's
yeah,
just about noticing what the weather is versus trying to change the weather.
yeah,
And if you look close enough, the weather's always changing. And that's the coolest part at the end is like, if you watch it long enough, you can watch it change.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like I could go in my backyard and rage against the fact that it's windy and overcast right now, but like it's not gonna change anything. It's still gonna be windy and overcast, and there's like a perfect analog to Jiu Jitsu here. Like you need to work with the situation as it is. There's a certain qualitative state to like being on the bottom of side control, and you could be there and wish it was different. You could be there and say like, I'm going to think positive and change the nature of this situation. But the fact of the matter is that the state of being under side control is fucking awful. And the more you're present to that awfulness, the more likely I think you're going to be able to deal with it in a constructive manner. Or
Yeah,
at
I think
least
so.
or surrender to it if there's really nothing you could do about it.
Right. And then find the time when you can. But yeah, I think the seeing it clearly then allows you to respond skillfully versus like just reacting. And
Yeah.
yeah.
So it sounds like you've done far more classical meditation training and practice than I have. I'm curious to know, like, and I know you're a meditation instructor too. So talk to me a little bit about like how you found your way into meditation.
Yeah. So let's see. I think I started meditating in 2012. I had just graduated high school at that time and started working a sales job and started selling Cutco, if you're familiar with the
Yeah,
kitchen
yeah,
knives. Yeah, yeah. And I was in a really weird office. Like my manager was one of those, like he could be a motivational speaker. He was just Jim Rohn and all these self-help books and Tony Robbins. So as I started reading all those books, one of them I read was called The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod. That guy happened to also graduate from that office like years before me selling Cutco. And so I read that book and it talked about meditation. And yeah, I was just kind of curious about it. And then, so I think that was when I formally like took it on, I guess. Previous to that, senior year of high school, my girlfriend had attended a 10-day meditation retreat because her dad went to one. And so I think some of the
Where'd
seeds,
you grow up? Where'd you go to high school?
grew up in Fremont. in the Bay Area of California.
Okay, so that explains it. Your high school experience would include things like mindfulness. Mine included things like doing drugs in the woods.
We had plenty of that too. Maybe not in the woods, but yeah. So I think the seeds were there, and then another. I think, yeah, I was pretty inconsistent at that time, and then I had a life coach I was working with at the time, and he recommended a book called 8 Minute Meditation, and it had you do a different style of meditation for 8 minutes a day for 8 weeks, and that's when the first time I had a consistent, like for 2 months. I don't know if I missed a day. I was very like, I'm going to try this. And then, yeah, that's how I got into it. And then as I went through college, I attended my first retreat, and I did one retreat each year in college. It was funny. I did one retreat and one Tony Robbins conference a year. And it was like very yin yang. But yeah, that's kind of where it got a little deeper. So yeah, that was my entry.
So that's how you got into it. And now you have some sort of certification or something, I take it? Or
I'm like right in the middle of it. I'm in a 2-year mindfulness meditation teaching certification program. It's quite a mouthful. But yeah, with Tara Brach and Jack Kornfield.
Okay, yeah.
And yeah, previous to that, at my last startup, because I had attended these retreats, and our head of HR, head of people, was starting to put together a management program. And so they somehow found out about me and invited me to teach mindfulness. So I would teach mindfulness for management training, and then I would also lead some mindfulness at our like all hands meetings and things like that. So that was like looking back on it when I was between jobs, and I was like, what was the most rewarding part of my work? Like I always pointed to that work. And so that's what called me to sign up for the 2-year program. And yeah.
That's fantastic.
Thanks.
So, okay. Now where does Jiu Jitsu fit into that milieu?
I think this is something that I haven't thought too much about it. I think a lot of times I've viewed it as separate, but I don't know. Maybe it's trying to bring, maybe how I think about it is like the quality of mindfulness is something I'd like to bring to all things that I do, and Jiu Jitsu is just one of another thing I'd like to bring it to. Yeah, this is something I would love to learn more of from you, actually, with especially how you talk about like the embodied practice along with the spiritual practice.
Yeah, the ecology of practices. And I ask that, I'm really asking that question. Sounds like I'm asking it with a point of view, but maybe there's smoke, but there's no fire there. I don't know. I mean, I think I try to organize my life in such a way where everything feeds into everything else.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe I'm open to the possibility that I'm wrong about that. You know, like take things seriously but hold them loosely. Like I'm a really big believer in that. So I don't want to force something that isn't there. Like maybe it's not there. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to me that you're exploring what the interrelationship might or might not be. Like maybe there isn't one.
Yeah, I think maybe a piece of it for me is like what made me so motivated as I got more into meditation is I felt like at a purely scientific or secular level, mindfulness helps to sharpen this mind. Like it helps us with attention and concentration and seeing clearly what is happening as it's happening. And I felt like the mind is like that common denominator. Like everything we experience filters through that. And so if I could sharpen that, then everything else I can see more clearly. And that's what led me to get into meditation at first was like, I was in sales. I was like, wanted to be more productive and add this as another tool to the toolkit. And I think a lot of people get into mindfulness for that reason. And later down the road, the spirituality and like the emotional benefits and reduction of suffering and all the mental health benefits came along with that. And all the philosophies and the esoteric beyond that. But in the beginning, it really was like, how can I sharpen this tool?
Yeah. And I think that's very common. And so you get into it thinking like, how can I sharpen this thing called a mind? And then you realize there is no mind. And there might not even be a thing called Josh, there might not even be a thing called Joe. So yeah.
And there we lost all the listeners.
Yeah. And look, hey, if you're hanging with us, thanks for sticking around. This is why my audience is so small.
small but mighty.
Yeah,
They're
yeah,
curious.
yeah. But look, this is a thing that I'm working on right now with both like my therapist and this coach that I'm working with, this amazing guy named David Zeitler. Um, Mystery is so essential to the human experience. It's arguably the ultimate driver of our creativity and ingenuity, right? This feeling of awe, of like standing in awe of something that you don't understand, but you're enraptured by it, either in a positive or negative way. Like, we don't even need to put a positive or negative valence on it. It could be this erupting volcano that has you awestruck because you think you're going to die. Or it could be standing in awe of the Grand Canyon, right? But there's a mystery to the nature of that thing's existence. And so much of like what modern cognition does is remove mystery. You know, we're so good at predicting things that we're getting to this point where like there really are no surprises. And like I'm not sure I'm not sure that's a positive thing, you know? And I find that if there is a more approachable way to approach the spiritual side of this thing, it's that it reignites this capacity for mystery. And that's what that's what really fires me up about it, is like, oh wow, everything I've come to hold about this notion of my brain being the seat of consciousness might be totally wrong, and consciousness might just be this soup that we're all like swimming around in, you know? That's like laying on my back on this night in Colorado and just looking up at the sky in the middle of nowhere and like seeing the cosmic dust. Like I get the same feeling of mystery and awe that I do from that vista as I do from like contemplating the fact that everything I consider real may not be real.
Yeah. Yeah, I in your discipline episode, I believe it was, where you started talking about discipline in a, maybe it was a spiritual way, and linking that with mystery. I that was that gave me a lot to think about. And as you're speaking, it reminded me. I went to an open mat the other day, and I was rolling with, I think, of a purple belt or something like that. And I got out after the roll. I was like, man, wow, there's so much to learn. And he's like,
Yeah.
he was like, dude, I'm jealous of where you're at. Like he was like, when I'm a purple belt, like I kind of know like what I did wrong, and it's not. He said the magic kind of went away, but I don't think it has to go away,
No.
right? And that's maybe what you're getting to, is there's always mystery. There's always,
100%.
and I think like noticing how much we don't know puts us in a really curious like place. It's like that Zen mind, beginner's mind quote of what is it? In the mass expert's mind, there are a few possibilities, and in the beginners, there are infinite or something like that. But yeah, how can we hold on to that white belt mystery, magic, unknowing all throughout the path? I think is interesting.
Well, I can guarantee it. If that purple belt makes it to black belt, he's going to be sitting there having that same realization of like, wow, this goes on forever. Like, I really don't know. I know that I don't know. I think that's what being a black belt is all about, is like it's not just like cognitive knowing that you don't know. It's really like a deep embodied knowing of like, I really don't fucking know, because this thing's just going to keep going. You know, it's fractal in nature. It's just going to keep, this art is going to, as long as there are people doing jujitsu is evolving every second, you know? It really is infinite. And like, it's extreme hubris to be like, yes, I am the master. Like, I've got this thing under control. And that's, to me, where like mystery shows up in a huge way in jiu-jitsu, and it gets you to realize it in the sense that like it is made real for you in a way that it's just pure abstract or mystical or mythical if you're just like studying a religious text. But like, you can feel that. I guarantee you everybody who's listening to us talk about this right now is like, oh yeah, like I felt that, but maybe I didn't articulate it that way, you know? I think that's what draws people to jiu-jitsu. They just don't, maybe they don't know it yet.
Right, and they discover it along the way. I'm like a little bit nervous. This is where the painted tigers, the future tripping comes in. I'm a little bit nervous about that first plateau in the
Yeah.
improvement where I'm gonna feel like, oh man, I know all this already. Like, why is he teaching this? I've seen it, and feeling that the grind of the work versus just the enjoyment of the process. So yeah, and that's what I love about this path is getting to observe yourself through all of these things. So yeah, I haven't reached that plateau yet, but I'm sure it's out there.
It is, and the fact that you're present to the possibility prepares you really well for it. Like one of my clients he's a 4-stripe white belt, and we were actually talking about this a little bit before. If you think about the growth period that you go through as a white belt, it's analogous to like watching my son go from 0 to 6 months. Like, you don't have as rapid of a growth period in your life like that again until you're like a teenager, and you're going through puberty. So you're present to the fact that like this is going to taper off and there's going to be a plateau. It's going to feel like a plateau, but it's actually like an almost imperceptible upward climb. But the fact that you have that in your awareness right now is going to prepare you to navigate that, at least more skillfully than I did. And hopefully, talking about that with my client will help him navigate that a bit more skillfully than I did. But yeah, it's a real thing. It's a real thing. And I do believe that's why so many blue belts quit, because they're just not prepared for that. They haven't thought about it. They haven't felt it.
Is an answer to that, like if you're in that plateau, is it to like let go of trying to constantly improve and just to like have fun and explore what you enjoy, to like optimize for this long haul versus like trying to get better in the short term?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and I'm reluctant to give an answer. And I don't even know if it's a matter of trying to have fun. Like, I really think it's just like a rite of passage. Like, it's something you just have to go through and experience fully. And like, it's going to be one of those things where you go through it and you go through it with a bunch of other people. And one day you're sitting around and you're all black belts and you're like, man, that was fucking terrible, but it was awesome. It was awesome because it was so terrible. And we were in it together,
Yeah. Yeah, that's going to be an interesting chapter.
It is. Look, I got the New York Open coming up in a couple weeks, like I said earlier, and I've never done well at that competition just because it tends to attract, New York's like a hotbed for Jiu Jitsu. It attracts a lot of high caliber people. And I'll never forget my first New York Open. I was a blue belt, and I got a takedown on this very scrappy blue belt, secured my points, and then just the whole thing fell apart. And I ended up losing by bow and arrow choke. And I was just like, why the fuck do I even do this? Like, I embarrassed myself, like I went out there, I should have done better than I did. And I knew I would never quit, but like I took like a week off from training after that match. Like that's not something I do, right? Just out of pure frustration. Like, sure, if I'm hurt or sick, yeah. But it was a real like psychological low point for me, and I don't think I fully let go of the pressing that I was doing to try and get better until purple belt. Like, something inside of me was just like, this is dumb. Like, I'm making this miserable for myself. Like, I just need to take this off, like the way you would like take off a jacket or something like that. And I did. So just like I just share that as like a cautionary tale. Like, I really don't think it's something that you can push through. I think if you're just pushing through it, it's just going to push right back. You just have to sit with it the same way you're going to sit with defending that triangle,
Yeah, it reminds me of that couple of cheesy. I'm a very cheesy person. I love quotes and all that. But what do they say? I heard on a podcast the other day, if you can't be cheesy, you can't be free. And I was just like,
It's
oh
true.
my God, this is great. I love that quote. But what was I going to say? There's that saying of like, what you resist persists. And this idea, the paradox of change. I heard this quote and it just blew my mind. And I think the paradox of change is that if we seek to change ourselves, what we find is resistance. But if we seek to love and understand ourselves, we find change.
Yeah.
And that just blew my fucking mind. I was like, holy shit, I gotta think about that one for a while.
I had the same reaction to listening to Alan Watts talk about this idea of self-improvement and how it's total bullshit. essentially. Like you
Oh,
can
say
only,
more.
he was saying, and I'll send you a link to it because he's going to do it far more eloquently than I ever could. But he was saying essentially that you can only ever be yourself, right? So this idea of like, I'm going to improve myself. What are you improving? Like you can only be this thing. It's like trying to improve the weather. It's analogous to that. The weather can only be what it is. And what tends to happen is that when people let go of self-improvement, everybody around them is like, oh man, they've gotten so much better. But in reality, like they haven't gotten better. They've just accepted themselves. And what you're seeing is they're more authentic. What word am I looking for? More like a more authentic presence, or like a more true version of who they are is now appearing in the world. And everyone thinks like, oh, they've gotten better, but in reality they've kind of just like gotten out of their own way.
Right. Instead of them trying to be some version that they think they should be, they're rather just taking the masks or the barriers off and
Yeah.
letting them be more them, or you be more you, whatever you is.
And
Yeah.
I see this all the time in people, the way people train. uh I can tell when they're trying to live up to some external expectation, or they're trying to be a version of some grappler that they admire. Um, and it's obvious. It's obvious because it's like they're wearing like a weird suit of clothes. Like you never dressed like that before. Like all of a sudden now you're wearing bell bottoms. Like what's up with that? You know? It's for whatever reason there's something about jujitsu that really brings that into focus when people are
Yeah.
not being true to who they actually are.
I feel that. I think I'm like the way I play jiu-jitsu is a little bit like I'm trying to be like Gordon Ryan style or Nicky Rod's with like the passing on your knees and whatnot. And yeah, I wonder how much of that is like in the beginning you don't know who you are, and so you're like
Yeah.
trying on people these clothes, and you're like, is this me? Is that me? And I don't know if to me it seems like part of it is like there's something you see in them that you admire, and maybe it's a little inkling of it that you might have yourself and you're trying to explore it, is that a little bit, but eventually along the way, I hear you and Emily talk about this a lot, is like making it yours, and your jujitsu becomes something only you can do, like that the purity
Yeah.
of the expression is just entirely unique. But I wonder if that trying on other stuff is part of that
It's
process.
definitely part of the evolution. Like I think about the process of becoming a songwriter or becoming a musician. Every musician I've known, every rock musician I've known has kind of gone through the same narrative arc where they start out playing covers. For me it was Nirvana. Like I just wanted to play Nirvana songs, and uh, then you kind of find your own thing. And like when I started writing my own music, I don't know where it came from. It was this very strange. It was not like any of the music I was listening to. It was more like country tinged rock with some bluegrass influence, and I had no idea where that was coming from. It was just kind of like bubbling up from deep inside of me. And years later, I realized like, oh, this was the music my dad always had on in the car,
Wow.
and that was kind of what spoke to me. That's kind of like what spoke to me on like a soul level, right? And I had that same feeling when I discovered X Guard. I found myself in X Guard and I was like, whoa, like this position, there's something about this position that calls to my conception of who I am. It was like a
Mm.
very organic thing. It was like the very first time I saw a guitar and I was like, I want that. I want to play that. Uh, and I think that it's very easy to fall prey to emulating the greats or wanting to be the greats, or and I think it comes from presence, really mindfulness, like being present to who you are and having strong enough conviction in that. And yeah, maybe you're inspired by something external, you're inspired by Gordon Ryan or Nicky Ryan or whatever, but ultimately that's just the ignition that starts the fire, that starts your personal fire, your personal
Hmm.
drive. And unless you have that presence, that quality of presence, that quality of mindfulness, like I wonder, like, are you going to miss that?
Right.
You know, are you never going to catch fire because you sort of missed the ignition, the moment of ignition?
Right. And keep focusing on this external of what I think I should be versus who I really am. Wow, that's powerful. That gave me a thought of like going into my next jiu-jitsu practice and maybe paying attention to what things feel really good and just really natural and smooth, of like, whoa, I really like that guard. Right now I'm trying to figure out what guard. My guards are just like a fumbling mess, I think. But I am trying to figure out which ones I do really enjoy. I'm getting an inkling that it may be butterfly because I'm tall, I got long legs, and yeah, it comes a little more naturally. But
I think that's huge. That's something I say to students in the school and clients all the time. There's this one guy who had, for a couple of years, he was wavering about the utility of half guard. Oh, I really like playing half guard, but so-and-so says it's not that great. And I'm like, look, man, if half guard is what sparks something for you in jiu-jitsu, do it. You know, like, I don't care what the theory du jour is. You could go to any school in America. You could go to Marcelo's in New York right now and get fucked up by someone playing an amazing half guard, even though like it's quote unquote like boomer guard, you know? Like if you do these things in a way that is aligned with who you are and you study them deeply and know it better than anyone else, like it's going to be really hard to counter that, you know? But it all starts with that feeling you're describing of like, I'm attracted to this. It's, you know what it's like? It's, you ever like, you're married, right?
No, just a girlfriend.
You have a girlfriend, okay.
Yeah.
Do you live together?
Not yet.
Not yet. So like a thing you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is a thing you're talking about. So before you met your lovely girlfriend who you're considering cohabitating with, I'm sure you went on dates with other people and you were like, this person's great, but like there's just not something there. Like, I experienced this too, and I would feel guilty about it. Like, this is a beautiful person. She's got a lot going for her. She's smart. She's pretty. But, like, I just can't make myself, like, want this to go further. And I think, like, jiu-jitsu and finding your jiu-jitsu is very similar to that. Like, there are so many pretty attractive, mysterious, you know, alluring things, sexy things out there that you might pursue. And, like, maybe you have fun playing K-guard for a little while. Maybe you have a good time exploring X-guard for a little while. But, like, you know, they just don't set your heart on fire the way butterfly guard does.
Yeah.
And all this sense of awareness, like, it comes from like a disciplined inward looking and feeling. And you might miss that if you're just kind of like going through the motions. So I'm a huge proponent of like, yeah, like tune into what sparks that ignition for you, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is very well said. It reminds me of the word, this phrase of like the deep knowing, when it just feels right and you really just know that this is right for me or wrong for me. Are you familiar with Boyd Varty?
Yeah, actually, very familiar. I'll tell you when we're done recording. We can talk more about that.
Okay, cool. I'm a huge fan. I listened to his podcast, read his books, and then
Lion Tracker's Guide for Life. Great book.
Oh, such a great book. And took his online course. Wow. And the way he talks about attuning to when you know something is right for you or when you're on the path versus off the path. Because the mind can be so tricky.
Yeah.
There's so many illusions and reasons and justifications, but deep, deep, deep down, can we attune ourselves to what we know is true for us that may not be true for someone else? That requires some courage and some introspection.
Sure. And look, you know, we have yet to have our bow hunting conversation, but I can't tell you how many times in my life in the woods where I would just have a strong feeling about something. And I had nothing to substantiate that feeling. It was just a hunch. Like in October when I killed that buck, there was just this deep compulsion of like, I need to be in the woods tonight and it needs to be this spot and I need to be in my stand by this time. Like I knew it was all going to happen and it all happened, right? And like, I don't know where that came from, but it was there. It was a thing. I felt it. I leaned into it
and I got that result. Uh, there's something about like hunting that trains that response. There's something too, I think, about jiu-jitsu too, because it's essentially like ritualized combat too, that develops that deep sense and seed of knowing, that Boyd's talking about when he's talking about tracking. I would love. I don't know how Boyd, as a conservationist, feels about hunting, but like it's certainly something I would love to talk to him about someday, because I really think we're talking about the same thing, when he talks about that. But I think you can train that just as well in jiu-jitsu too.
Yeah, that attunement. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The themes across these things are, I feel like if you got a dollar for every time you said thematic on your podcast, you'd be super rich. But man, that is a piece I think a lot of people leave on the table of like
Yeah.
how jujitsu, the lessons learned from it can be applied to
Yeah.
anything. Yeah.
I got to tip my cap to you talk about the thematic thing. Like that's all Josh Wade skin. Like that was giving a language, like finding his work and working with him was giving a language and a structure to something that I felt. And then realizing like, oh, there's something to this. Like I'm just a regular guy. I felt this, but this guy essentially became who he is by leaning into this and like systematizing it. It was just like it was like getting a knowing nod from somebody in a crowded room, like,
Right.
like, okay, like this guy's onto something here.
Yeah.
Boyd, I
his
get the
book-
same feeling from Boyd too.
Yep. Yeah, I feel like they're akin. Yeah, his book, The Art of Learning. Wow. Yeah, that
Yeah.
read it multiple times. It's blowing my mind. It's when I first got into rock climbing. I don't climb anymore, but I remember climbing and I was like, whoa, I rock climb the same way I play chess. And then now I'm like, same with jujitsu. I'm like, man, I'm too careful sometimes. I'm too nice. I'm like, I need to, yeah, tune my head a little bit. And it's great to have those things revealed to you through the practice.
Totally. Sorry, I gotta connect. I'm not gonna edit this out because I don't edit my podcast. I have to connect my iPhone to battery here. So bear with me 1 second.
Yeah, no worries. And now everyone will know your camera is your iPhone camera.
Listen,
But it
guys,
works
if you have an
wonderfully.
iPhone, you too can be a podcaster with a tiny audience, tiny but loyal audience. So, I tend to veer on this podcast like out into the ethereal and abstract, and I think like one of the leading criticisms is like, okay, like what the fuck do I do with that? Like this is all great. Like where do I get started? So like, let's put like the tire. Let's let the tire get some traction here. You mentioned you journal, and you mentioned you have a daily mindfulness practice. What does that look like for you? And if I'm someone listening to this podcast is like, all right, I'm down. Where do I start? Like, how would you advise people to get started with cultivating a life of mindfulness, a practice of mindfulness?
Yeah, I think first is I think everybody's got probably a different way into it, so I'll share a few. That book, The 8 Minute Meditation, is a great one. If you're someone who likes to read, someone who likes maybe a little bit of structure, I think that's a great one. And then Headspace. I love
You like
Headspace.
Headspace, yeah.
Yeah, I still use some of the self-guided ones or the semi-guided ones at times. Guided meditations are great. I think YouTube has a bunch of free ones. Search up 1 minute guided meditation, 10-minute guided meditation, whatever that might be. And I love those because it's almost like a little mindfulness alarm of like, hey, remember, you're meditating. Every couple minutes it comes, hey, remember, you're meditating. So it's gentle. It's great. There are some books. I really like 10% Happier by Dan Harris. And I think he wrote another book called Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics. I just love that title. And 10% Happier was great because it was a very skeptic. It follows his journey of like being super skeptical of like, let me go enter this world of all these cheesy folks and then find out what's real, what's not, what's practical and not. So I like that book. And also, if you're down, we can do a little bit of practice here for a few
Absolutely.
minutes.
Yeah. So before we get into that, though, like let's do a little bit more on tactics. So you
Hmm.
mentioned earlier at the beginning of the podcast that you had this experience competing. It sparked some, let's call it negative emotions, shame specifically, and that you were journaling on them, and journaling was producing some revelations. So like, how does journaling fit into your ecology of practices here with mindfulness practice, journaling, jujitsu? What's the connection there?
Yeah. So when mindfulness, I like this framework of what can we, where can we direct our attention, and we have our senses, right? Our smell, taste, sights, feelings, etc. And then we have thoughts and emotions. And I feel like journaling really helps me see my thoughts clearly on paper, and then also sit with the emotions that are entangled with those thoughts, and then maybe see what stories are behind there, what may be empowering or disempowering. Um, so yeah, related in a way.
Yeah, so it's externalizing the internal and then being to able to look at it objectively.
Yeah, and sometimes I'll like, if I'm a lot of times I'll journal when I'm trying to work through something, and sometimes I'll sit with it and I'll journal, hey, this is what I'm thinking, this is how I'm feeling, and then I'll just put my pen down, and then, all right, where is this in the body now? Oh, is it a
Mm.
tightness in my chest? Is it a heat in my face? Like, and just start to bring that curiosity, and then it's almost like a journaling leading into then like a body practice, like a mindfulness
Mm.
of
That's
the body
interesting.
practice. Yeah, and then I'll go back to it. Okay, let me just. It's part of the allowing, the let it be. Let me. This too belongs. Can I sit with this?
Yeah, when my therapist does that, when we're doing talk therapy, it's always very constructive, but I never thought about incorporating it in to journaling because like you, a lot of times I'm sorting through difficult things on paper, but it's mostly just to get it all out of my head. I almost said like I'm vomiting,
Hmm.
but I never pause to be like, what is the quality of the vomit?
Yes, exactly. It's like, how does it smell? What's it feel like? Where do I feel it?
Yeah,
All of that I think is quite
but that's
valuable too.
important. That's so important. That's really
Yeah,
cool. Did you? Is that
thanks.
something you just figured out on your own, or is that something you picked up someplace else? Like, that's really great.
Thank you. Actually, yeah, I think it's a hodgepodge of stuff. Like Tara Brach has her practice called RAIN, recognize, allow, investigate, nurture. And it's, you take a challenging emotion and you go through this process of this mindfulness practice. And it was early on when I had this realization of like, oh man, I just put a positive spin on everything. Like I'm in my head all the time, blah, blah, blah. How can I sit with this? And then that's when I was literally journaling about a very difficult situation and about being in my head, and I was like, all right, let me just sit with this. And then I just paused the journal, and that was the first time I did it, and it was very impactful. Like, oh wow, I can be with this, however unpleasant, I can be with
Yeah,
this. And it was a very empowering moment.
that's
Yeah,
beautiful. That's
thanks.
beautiful. It's reminding me of something that this is. I feel like this is maybe a version of that. Like I work alone. You know, I work at home. There's almost never anyone here, um, except my cat. And whenever I have like a negative emotion, I sometimes I'll just like let it rip in like a really outrageous way. Um, you know, and I'll like in a way to like to laugh at myself. Like, you know, I'll like flip double birds. I'm doing it because like it's funny, you know, and that humor then like welcomes in some curiosity about like it disarms it, you know. It's like, okay, well, what's really going on here? Like I'm just
Hmm.
annoyed that this person's not understanding things from my point of view, and like having that outsized reaction um, somehow like creates that space where I can see it and where I can feel it. But again, like what's missing there is like the feeling. And
Hmm.
that's what I'm going to steal from you having had this conversation is like, okay, we have the outsized reaction and I'm doing the journaling and now there's space, but like what's the somatic experience there in addition to the cognitive experience?
Yeah, where is it, that embodiment aspect
Yeah.
of it? And also the humor is powerful. Like writing about something and then asking yourself what's funny about this, or what could be funny about this if there had to be something funny about it. That takes you to a really different level of energy. I also wanted to say, even this idea of negative emotion is one I like to challenge, because negative and positive emotions kind of, to me, those words seem to put a value judgment on
Totally.
the emotion. And so a frame of mind, I think that might have came from mindfulness too, is like the words of pleasant and unpleasant, or challenging and difficult emotions. And another place I learned it from was being a sitter for people. So I've gone to Burning Man a couple times, and I got to work at Zendo and be a sitter for people going through really difficult experiences, usually on hard drugs. And one of the principles they taught us was that difficult is not necessarily bad. And wow, that kind of gave me a little bit more space, even within myself, of feeling difficult
Yeah,
things, but not being like shaming of like, this is bad, this, you shouldn't be feeling it, you know. So yeah, I just wanted to
that's
offer that
beautiful.
as well.
It's so that's something I really take to heart, and my wife and I really work on with our son.
Mm,
Is whenever he's 2, so he has very like outsized emotional reactions, because these emotions are real. They're in your body. You're feeling them, and to him, it's no different than like feeling physical pain, right? So a lot of it is acknowledging it and just saying to him like, yeah, like it feels really difficult, like it's really hard when we have this idea of what we want and we can't have it. And it starts with just like acknowledging it and saying
yeah.
like, this is a real thing. um, but then like not putting valence on it is so important. Like, and this is something I've stolen directly from Josh. Like, my wife and I, we don't talk about the weather as being good or bad. We'll just say like, it's raining today, you know, we're going to put on our rain jacket and we're going to go outside. You know, it really bothers me when parents are like he went with a friend, my wife and a mutual friend, they went to Sesame Place today because school's closed, and going out the door I heard my wife's friend say like, oh, the weather's good today. And I'm like, the weather's good, there's really no such thing as good or bad weather. You just either have good or bad clothes, you know,
Right.
depending on what the weather is outside. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's just, you got to be really careful with valence and judgments, because they have a way of just contaminating things in ways that we aren't present to.
Right. So tricky. No, so sneaky. It just enters our subconscious almost.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's if you're more, I would love to do some sort of a seated meditation here with you for a few minutes, and I think this would be a great way to introduce, if anybody is still with us, introduce the proud and the few standing people here to some meditation practice. Obviously, if you're driving your car, you know, like maybe now's not the time for this. But if you're stationary and maybe you're like commuting or something like that on public transit, this might be a good opportunity for you to get a little taste of this. So, you know, if you're willing, Josh, maybe we could do a few minutes here and take us through it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'll guide this assuming that the listener is able to pause and find a place that they can sit in a semi-quiet environment. But if you are listening to this while you're driving or on a commute or on a run, I would challenge you to take a pause, or maybe after the episode, to take your headphones out, and then just even right now if you're driving, just take a pause and pay attention to the physical sensations of what it feels like to be driving or walking. Notice any bumps in the road, notice what you're seeing in front of you, and see what that's like for a few seconds. Even if you could do it like 5 seconds. Oh, okay, interesting. And then just go back to listening to your music or whatever. So yeah, that's for all those folks. For everybody else listening, and for you, Joe, go ahead and find a seat, or you can sit on the ground, you can sit on a chair, whatever's most comfortable. The goal here is to find a posture where you can feel both alert but relaxed. So see if you can get alert, stay alert and yet relaxed, not so stiff, not so slouched. Find that neutral point. And then just notice your body in space. Notice the weight of the body on the chair or on the ground. And if it's comfortable for you, you can go ahead and close your eyes and notice your feet on the floor. Notice the weight of your body come into this moment here in this space. And what we'll work with today is the breath. We often like to work with the breath because it's always with us. And start to pay attention to where you feel the breath most obviously. For some, you may feel the breath in your nose. For some, it may be in your chest. For others, maybe in your belly. Doesn't really matter where you feel the breath the most. Just start to notice where that is for you and locate that in the body. For some, if it's difficult to find your breath, it may be helpful to place a hand on your belly or a hand on your chest. And start to see if you can notice the rising and falling of your hand. And this is what we'll work with, this sensation of breathing for the next few minutes, the next 20 or 30 breaths or so. And start to pay attention to the inhale, the pause between breaths, and the exhale. And see if you can cover the entire breath, every cycle from start to finish. See if you can cover that entire breath with your attention. Notice if your breath is shallow or if it's deep. Doesn't matter how you're breathing, we're just noticing the qualities of the breath. There's no need to change it. We're just becoming aware of each breath. And if you find the mind wandering or getting distracted with sounds, notice that too. And it's okay to sit with those for a bit. And gently, whenever you're ready, to bring a soft smile to your face and notice that your mind has gone somewhere else. And whenever you're ready, you can gently return it back to the breath. There's no rush. And see if you can cover the breath for the next 5 breaths. There's nowhere to be, nothing to do, but to pay attention to the breathing that is happening right now. Now for this practice, we'll pay attention to about 5 more breaths as we slowly come to a close, and see if you can follow the breath from start to finish all the way through for these last few breaths. And then whenever you're ready, you can go and open your eyes, settle back into where you are in space, and thank you. Appreciate you all giving this a shot and giving it a try. So yeah, that was a few minutes there.
Thank you, Josh. I hope that everybody enjoyed that. Josh, I really enjoyed talking with you. I hope we can make this a regular thing. You know,
yeah.
It's the beautiful thing about Jiu Jitsu in general is you got friends in every city, and the most amazing thing about doing this podcast is the people that it has brought into my life. And you're an awesome dude, and I just look forward to getting to know you better and talking with you some more. Be fantastic if we could make this a semi-regular thing.
That would be awesome. And I'm headed out to the East Coast in April, here in a few weeks.
Awesome. I hope I'm here.
Oh yeah, I'll be there I think it's the 19th to the 28th.
Okay. I'm going to be in Central America at some point. I don't know.
Oh, wow.
To be determined when, but I think you said the 19th to the 28th you're going to be around. I'm looking at my calendar right now, and I think that'll line up. So definitely come by.
Okay. Yeah, I'll drop by Princeton and I'll find a date that works for you.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Josh.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks to Josh for coming on the podcast. Really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you all did as well. Obviously, if you enjoyed this conversation, you should go and check out 1-800-BJJ-HELP, where Josh goes deep on all things jiu-jitsu and the jiu-jitsu learning process with Jake Luigi from Less Impressed, More Involved BJJ on YouTube. If you want to support the podcast, the best way to do that is to go over to bjjmeditations.com. That's where you can book a coaching session with me that can either be in person or online. My BJJ Frameworks training is where we do a thematic exploration of whatever is limiting your growth potential in jiu-jitsu. Come up with a custom training plan for you that includes both jiu-jitsu specific things as well as more generally speaking life-oriented things. And we make connections between these two seemingly disparate areas to improve performance on and off the mats. Working with a number of fascinating people right now. And if that speaks to you, then go over and book an introductory session. You can also make a donation via Venmo on the BJJ Meditations website to offset production costs of the podcast. You can read the essays that periodically underpin some of these episodes. And of course, you can sign up for our mailing list, TBD, when we deploy that. We've got a lot of stuff going on right now. Other than that, check out the highest levels over on BJJ Mental Models Premium. It's a show I do with Emily Kwok where we discuss some of the principles and how they work on the highest levels of human performance relative to our peak performance consulting work with Josh Waitskin. If you'd like to sponsor BJJ Meditations, email me at bjjmeditations@gmail.com. Like, subscribe, review, and share wherever you're listening to this podcast or watching. You can follow on Instagram, BJJ_meditations. You can read me on Substack, johannon.substack.com. And of course, come train at Princeton Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. We don't care what gear you're wearing so long as it's clean. We don't care what school you're coming from so long as you're not a douchebag. Just come and train. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you next week.